Wow, got people here already. That's amazing. Hello, everyone. Today's the 13th of October, 2021. And as usual, I've been out and about pondering and cogitating, and now I'm ready to, I guess, start pontificating, so to speak. Hello, everyone, as you come in. We're in dire straits, ladies and gentlemen. We're in dire straits. And as normal on YouTube, I'm going to be talking kind of such that you'll need to read between the lines. I won't be saying things straightforwardly, but in somewhat veiled terms, and you're just going to have to use your knowledge, intelligence, and wit to kind of figure it out. And I think it'll be fairly easy. Thank you for letting me know it's 5 by 5. Oh, Wyoming, really? Who we got here? Dwight McGuire, great, thanks. Wyoming, I'm glad you're here. Well, your governor and your legislature sure screwing up, aren't they? And so is Utah, which is why I decided to come on today. I was listening to David Knight this morning. I try to keep up on some of the local things, but this one slipped by me. Apparently, there was about a group of, I guess, around 600 people that gathered at the Capitol, the Utah, during the Utah legislature, whatever, yesterday, to demand that all this nonsense stop. And you should know what I'm talking about as far as the restrictions are concerned. And a lot of it has, but not in the schools. And there are some other things, of course, that are coming down the line. So a lot of brave folks. Unfortunately, not nearly enough. The entire state should be up in arms, but unfortunately, a great amount of the state of Utah is now on the leftist, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term, but just so I can say it, is on the leftist side, especially in along the Wasatch Front in Salt Lake County. It's really bad, and also up in Summit County as well, particularly around Park City. But regardless, the legislatures turned a deaf ear to them. Number one, because they're all being, the legislature and the governor, etc., are all being influenced by, I'm just going to call it out, evil forces, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more in just a minute. They're probably getting financial incentives, and also, of course, like I said, they're being threatened if they don't toe the line. I'm certain that that's what's going on at one level or another. A lot of it has to do, however, with another influence, which partly has to go along with my theme here. But the point is that not enough people are standing up. Not enough people have set themselves and their houses in order, and because of that, the judgments are going to continue and get worse and worse and worse. We're not going to have a shield of protection for us because the people refuse to take responsibility. So the same thing is basically happening in Wyoming. Up there have been police officers that have arrested children, at least one that I know of, for not abiding by the restrictions. Can you imagine that? I mean, what they're doing is they're teaching the children to have no respect for police officers, and that's the police officers' fault. They're the ones that are pushing these things instead of standing up for the rights of the people and calling out the government. They are the government enforcers, as we've seen in other countries, and they don't abide by their oaths nor the spirit of their office, which is actually given to them by the people. And all of this has been a problem, and I've been pointing it out for many, many years. And I thought what I would do is, and this is going to upset some people, but you know me, I'm always out here spreading hate and discontent, at least against the ruling class, against the elites, against the ignorant, against the self lobotomized, and against those who have. I was corrected, by the way, by a psychologist. I used to call it cognitive dissonance. Well, actually, cognitive dissonance is a sign of intelligence in some regards because you're able to entertain two conflicting thoughts at the same time and work within them. that's actually a sign of intelligence. I'm not saying that you give in to the evil side. I'm saying that you can work with even two opposing viewpoints and be able to figure your way through it. What she told me was that the real true term for what we see most of the time with people ignoring what's really happening is cognitive bias. And I can understand that now, so I'm going to try to use the right terms from now on. So a lot of people have this cognitive bias, and uh, it's really turned into a dangerous situation because we turn a blind eye to the problems that actually face us because we don't want to look at our own guilt, our own lack of righteousness and action. Now, again, some of this will be getting into some scriptural things, but I think just look at it from a moral point of view or immoral point of view. The difference between morality and immorality, the difference between righteousness and unrighteous, the difference between right and wrong. A simple, very simple thing. What you wouldn't want done to you, you don't want to do to someone else. That's pretty simple. Most everybody can understand that. So that's where I'm going to come from this morning. But these actions by the Utah legislature and Utah governor, and similarly in Wyoming, both states are heavily influenced by the Mormon Church. I'll just let you know that. A lot of Mormons will get upset, and I know you don't like to be called Mormons anymore, but I'm going to use that term. The Mormon Church has a lot of influence in both those states, in Nevada too as well, in Idaho, Arizona, not so much in Colorado, but basically in Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, a little bit in Montana, not too much, Nevada, and in Arizona, and quite a bit in certain parts of California. But I'm going to concentrate on Utah and Wyoming because those are the states that I have the most to do with, as most of you know. So, what's happened here? Well, a couple of things that I think we need to realize. First of all, as I said, we don't have our own houses in order. We're not standing up for what's right on our own accounts. And we're trying to slide through, hoping that this thing will pass us by if we just keep our mouths shut and keep a low profile. And as I've said, you need to prep, pray, and stay out of the way. But I'm not talking about not using your First Amendment. Okay, I'm not talking about not being involved. I'm talking about don't get involved in a real protracted fight, like I said before in describing that. If you see the BLM and Proud Boys at it on the street, don't get involved. That's what I'm talking about. And don't think that you can do offensive action. Everything needs to stay defensive. The moment you start doing offensive action, and I could get real specific on that, but just take me for my word at this point. The moment you start doing offensive actions, the Spirit of the Lord departs from you, and it's true that a good defense is a good offense, but you have to be careful how you define that. And that's not my purpose here. My purpose here is to show that we need to get ourselves in order and stand for the right thing, and be willing to be the voice of that. And you all know that. We've been talking about it for a long time. But you look back in the history of the last 2,000 years, and this was really true even before that, but I'm not going to go there because a lot of people just, trying to follow that history is too hard. So let's keep it local, within the last 200, 300, 400, 500 years even. And we hear other commentators talking about this quite a bit. I hear David Knight talking about it. And to his credit, even Alex Jones talks about it. And there are others, Glenn Beck and others. However you feel about the person of Jesus Christ, however you feel about that story, that faith, that deal. The real important thing is just like the evil system that we're seeing now. You got to look at the system, and that's why I talk so much about the system of Christianity, about the system of the Antichrist, about the systems that are involved, because that's really what's easy to see, not so much the individual people, right, or historical personages. And while there have been some real problems in Christianity, the Inquisition during especially the Spanish Inquisition, those types of things have been very bad. The burning of people for slightly different beliefs than the organized Orthodox organization, and that was very wicked. The decent Christian organizations were taken over by those who wanted to exert power and influence. As I've said before, as a matter of fact, I think it was yesterday. Einstein, for instance, thought that it would be best if the world was ruled by scientists. Well, we see what happens now. As soon as the scientists get in there, as soon as they get a little authority, a little power, they start abusing it. And that goes for any group of people. It could be artists, it could be, like I said, scientists. Medical would kind of fall on the scientific side. Certainly politicians, certainly business leaders, because we see the corporatocracies and things like that now. And again, read between the lines. So it's anytime a single group of people, regardless of their background, get autonomous authority, they begin to exercise really, really serious evil. And so that happened in the churches as well, despite the fact that some people will dislike that. I see the Catholics in particularly talking about, the set of Adventists, if you know what that is, the trad Catholics, the traditional Catholics. The problem with Pope Francis as opposed to Pope Benedict, or say John Paul, or even going back further in history. The point is, all these organizations have become corrupt to one extent or another, and it really comes down to being able to be disciplined ourselves, so that we don't fall victim to that we always stand on the straight and narrow. So, again, reading between the lines here, the title of this video is what is the pathway to liberty? What is the sequence that needs to occur where we might be able to, if we're fortunate, because as you know, we're really far gone at this point. We're way, way down the road. And I anticipate that these actions, even taken at this point in time, are going to result only in a further division and separation. And I understand that. I think it's too far gone to ever think that the Republic can be brought back whole and healed again. I don't see that at all. Historically, politically, spiritually, it just isn't going to happen. So what do we do? Well, first of all, and this is what I wanted to bring out, there was a wise man that lived about 30, 40 years ago, actually longer than that, about 60, 70 years ago. And he wrote some books, and I'm not going to tell you his name or anything like that. I just want to give you his concepts. He said that what would have to happen is that the churches would have to be set in order first. They would have to get their priorities right. And then the states. And then, if it's possible, the central federal government. However, he also said that it would be most likely that the central federal government would be totally destroyed, taken down, and would have absolutely no ability to govern at some point in time in the future. And he said it wasn't that too far in the future. So what I want to home in on is this idea of setting ourselves and our churches in order. Because like in the Revolution, you could go back to the Magna Carta and the situation that occurred then. We can go back to, like I said, the Revolution, and see how the clergy in particular was a very strong driving force, probably even more than the politicians like Patrick Henry, etc. The churches and the pastors and the ministers were the really driving force to get the people to understand the real problem and to take action. It really started in the churches, which is why, of course, we see so many churches being shut down now, places of gathering. They don't want you to do that. A lot of fighting back on that in the U.S., but it's still happened. It's very serious in Canada and Australia, as you know. So you shut down the lines of communication, which is one of the first acts of war that you do. Okay, you start off with the propaganda campaign, the info war, so to speak, and then you shut off the lines of communication of your enemies, so they can't communicate with each other. And then you start interdicting their supply lines. We see that happening now. And then you start taking out targets. You separate the targets out and you start taking them out. And that's where we're headed at this point in time. Well, so we're really back in the situation of 1775, 74, that area right now. And unfortunately for us, most of the churches have been bought off, as you know, with the 501c3 status, with you know the uh, the whole thing with the churches, especially the leaders of the churches, being allies with the government to keep their people under control. And all of that was pre-planned and done because they saw what the churches could do in the 1700s and they didn't want a replay of that. Now, there's some exceptions, of course. Chuck Baldwin, Liberty Ministry up in Montana is a good example. Apparently, there are a couple churches in California that have stood up, and there have been others across the country. But the main churches, not saying there aren't a lot of little ones that haven't been a problem, but the main churches have really taken the side of the beast system. And I think most of us realize that. Uh, and that's where Utah, Wyoming, Nevada, for that matter, Idaho, have been having a problem. Of course, Italy's having a problem because they're right there under the Vatican City, which is the papal state is in fact a separate entity than Italy, but it resides in Italy and has an awful lot of power, and it of course does across the world. And at least you should know, where the papacy at this point stands in regards to the system that is being pushed out, this medical system that's being pushed out by force across the world, with threats of all sorts of things if you don't comply. So that should tell us right there that there's a problem there, okay? Well, Mormons, the same thing is happening in your arena as well. Your leaders, and I talked about this on a video several months back when this happened, your leaders have come out and pushed for this coerced procedure. And because of that, you don't have the ability to fall back on the so-called religious exemption because your church has already stood up against it. That should tell you that they're with the system. They're supporting the evil system. There's no prophet, seer, and revelator. There's no apostle of Jesus Christ. There's no representative of God in that system if they're going along with that. Okay? I'm just telling you blank, up front, plain and simple. Okay? So without the churches being adamant about the principles of liberty, and especially when it comes to things like products of sacrificing babies, you can read between the lines here, tearing down the family. And I could talk a lot about that, and maybe one day I will. I've done a little bit in the past, but the concept of family has been altered seriously over the last several decades, actually several centuries. And it's really unfortunate because we now see the results of that across the spectrum. But people didn't believe me in the 80s when I told them that this is where it was going, and now here we are. And so it was almost like what I envisioned would happen because of their rejection of what I was saying, that society would fall apart even more, and that's really been the case. And I wrote about that in my first book, An Offender for a Word, and I touched on it in my second book as well. But at any rate, getting back to the problem at hand, we're not going to be able to fix what's happening even individually, although it really does start with the individual and getting yourself right. You've heard me often say everyone wants to be right, almost no one wants to get right. So you have to get right first, and you have to know what that means to get right. And if you don't know, you need to find out, and you need to find out in a hurry. But after that, what's important is that the churches need to be set right, need to be set in order. The people that are leading these organizations that are contrary to the principles of the gospel, of the scriptures, of individual freedom of mankind, of the individuals, who do not, and churches that support this system, right? They need to be replaced. And that's not easy to do because, like in the Mormon church, as most Mormons know, there is a vote that happens every year during conference. I think it might be both conferences, the one in October and the one in April, but at least one of those, they have a thing where everybody votes to sustain the leadership of the church. Well, you can't do that anymore. In good conscience, you can't do it, even if it means they ostracize you, which it's a false vote. You vote against the sustaining the leadership, and you're going to get axed, right? I already know that. It happened to me, so I know that. And then in the Catholic Church, for instance, you've got problems because of the power structure there, and it's in other places as well. The Anglican Church, the Presbyterian, the synagogues. It's actually everywhere, but it starts on the individual level. And if we want to have the sequence of getting to the point where we fix what we can, we fix ourselves, our families, our neighborhoods. That is the church, okay? Frankly, the big organizations, the big institutions are really not where it's at. It's really in us, okay? So we have to get ourselves ready and do the right things, regardless of the consequences. Do what's right even if no one else is doing it. Stand on principle even if you're the only one doing it, okay? But the institutions are definitely a hindrance to us right now, all right? The Mormon Church is a good example for you Mormons, and you're allowing it to control your state government. The Mormon Church, with the federal government behind the scenes, because it licks the boots of the federal government, it is controlling your state government, and even on down to the counties and the cities. Absolutely. And anybody who doesn't believe that is just being foolish and naive. So you need to figure out a way to stop going up to the state capitol, to the legislature, and petitioning them for relief, because they're listening to somebody else, not just the feds, but the leadership of the church, the LDS church. So I would suggest that it's now time that you, if you're going to demonstrate, if you're going to say that things need to get fixed, you need to go and demonstrate in front of 47 East South Temple, at Temple Square, at the conference center. You have to go there. You have to set the church in order first. You have to call them to account first, because their influence on your state government, you don't understand how strong it is. I do. So, this wise man said, the first thing we do, of course, is set ourselves in order, our families, our neighborhoods, etc. But then it has to go to the church, and you can look at it as being those who are all converted to the truth, converted to Jesus Christ, converted to God, etc. You can look at it that way. But these institutions, accountability. These institutions are wielding power that you're refusing to acknowledge that they have. They're not speaking for God. They're speaking for the beast system. And what the president of the Mormon Church did, and his counselors, and the quorum of the 12 did with regards to pushing this requirement, and you should know what I'm saying, what I'm talking about, tells you what side they're on, and you need to insist that they be replaced. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to choose people to go in there and take their place, okay? And that's going to be very hard to do. I'm not kidding myself. But you're going to have to go down there, and you're going to have to demonstrate in front of them. That's the power in Utah. And to some extent, as I've said, in Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, and even portions of California. You're wasting your time going to the Utah State Legislature and the governor. Now, every day, I end up tweeting Governor Cox of Utah, Governor Gordon of Wyoming, my senators that I know about in Utah, and certainly my senator in Wyoming, John Barrasso, has turned out to be a traitor, as far as I'm concerned, to his constituency and to the Constitution and all that, and I've called him out on it. But I also know that not only are they listening to formidable forces like the large pharmacia companies and the military industrial complex, the intelligence complex, et cetera, but they're also listening to these powerful religious leaders. I know for a fact that the security services, for instance, of the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, are comprised primarily of prior CIA, Secret Service, and FBI personnel, a few police and sheriffs, but primarily those huge intelligence organizations. How do I know that? I worked with them as a federal officer when I was a military officer. I worked with them. I know who they are. And then with my own personal grievances with them during the 80s and the 90s. Any of you fortunate enough to maybe read my book that I wrote that I published in 1996, I Wed Three Wives. If you ever read that, um, you'll see what's in there. And there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest what occurred, a lot of proof actually. And I took it to the FBI, and the FBI even admitted that it was a excellent evidence for a civil rights violation done by the LDS Church, the Mormon Church. But the agent in charge, as I've often talked about on this YouTube channel, um, told me that as much as he wishes the FBI was professional, that they will shut that investigation down, and that's exactly what happened. Uh, just so you know, the agent's name is Johnny Turner. Okay, so you feds that are listening to this, you'll know that you know already. You know already. So what I'm saying is there's a sequence of events that has to happen. You're going to have to change the leadership of your church, the institution of your church has power that they wield in Utah and those other states I've mentioned, that if you don't make a change in the leadership of that church and tell them how serious it is, you're going to have to get real serious with them. Don't demonstrate at the legislature anymore because they're not listening to you. Oh, a few might, but you're not going to get the number you need. And then you'll probably say, well, Roy, I thought you said that there are a lot of leftists in Utah. Well, they are, but leftists are pretty smart. They might not be members of the church. They might be, it depends, but they know where the real power structure is. So they're going to be listening to your prophet, seer, and revelator, his counselors, and the 12 apostles that sit down there on 47 East South Temple. Those are the people you're going to have to really, really push hard and to get them replaced. Okay? That's the way it's got to be. And if you don't do that, the next step won't happen. And what's the next step? You got to take control of your states. Now, and it's true, David Knight says everything needs to be local. So you take care of your city, your city council, your county government. That's where the big changes need to occur. But I'm making this caveat, especially in Utah and Wyoming, because, and these other states I've mentioned, because of the church's influence. So while I admit that we have to move for local changes and protections, as David Knight talks about, the lesser magistrates, very, very important in our history and everything else. You need to then go after not just setting yourselves in your little groups, which we could call churches. Churches is nothing more than a community. Ecclesia is nothing more than a community. It's what it means. Then you've got to go and force changes in these powerful institutions if you want to make a change at the next level, which is the state. And that's the way it has to go. First, you set your churches in order. Then you set your state in order. And then possibly, you can get to the larger federal government, but I doubt it. I think at that point it's going to be already falling apart and balkanized. But you have to do those first steps that I just said. You've got to change your churches. And for those of you who don't belong to the larger institutions like the Mormon Church or the Catholics or the Anglican or the Presbyterian or the Lutheran or whatever, you're still going to have to make sure that your local pastors, ministers, etc., the ones that you abide with, are not supporting this system. And if they are, you need to get the hell out. If you can't get those leaders replaced, and have that church that you belong to, if it's an organization, as I said, if you can't get it on the right course, it's time for you to go somewhere else, because all you're doing is wasting your time. They're prima facie, manifestly not righteous. All right? That's what you've got to do. How successful will this be? That's entirely up to the people. Because at this point, the evil side is so strong that you're going to have to be immovable in your positions. You're going to have to be steadfast, immovable, unchangeable, and demanding. I've talked about this before, where a judge told me that you have to belligerently demand your rights. And you're going to have to belligerently demand that the organizations you belong to do the right thing. All right? Now, that might seem like, why are you wasting your time on this subject, Roy? Well, because I think it's something that needed to be said. You can take it for what it's worth. Do I think that you're going to succeed? I don't know. I'm kind of drawing out at this point. There are some examples, which I'm not going to get into right now, of how far uh, someone like me, for instance, should go in trying to get the people to act. And I've been at this for 40 years, okay? Actually, a little longer. And it's probably time for me to step back a little bit. I've kind of done that already, but you know, and I don't have any illusions of grandeur or anything like that. But my words have been the same for 40, 45 years, and it didn't make much of an impression along the way, and it still isn't. A lot of you appreciate it, but until we take control of these churches, you're not going to get control of your local and particularly your state governments. You're just not going to do it. In Maryland, for instance, the Catholic Church, at least it used to, it's been many years, I grew up in Maryland, the Catholic Church was pretty much the thing in Maryland, and it wielded a lot of power. So there, you'd have to do something about that. What's the possibility of that? I don't know. You're going to have to figure that out. But certainly in the western states where the Mormon church has influence, ladies and gentlemen, you who live in Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, you're going to have to get a hold of this organization that claims this authority over you and demand that they make changes. That's where your demonstrations, your efforts need to start. Change the churches first. Good luck. Let's see what this is. Yeah, well, let's see. I'm going to tell you, American Defender, you better be careful about what the FBI identifies as a terror organization or terrorists in general. Uh, for all you know, they could be talking about a community defense group that has put together a response team with weapons and stuff to protect their community. The FBI might even label them as terrorists. I've talked about how the federal government, I went through the Army Terrorism Counteraction course in the 80s, and I learned then that what you think is a terrorist is not what the government thinks is a terrorist, and the definitions have gone from about a dozen to scores to now hundreds, to where if you even show up at the Capitol of the United States for redress of grievance, you're considered a terrorist. And now, of course, if you question an election, if you don't go along with The health requirements. If you know those types of things, you're considered a terrorist now. Just go back and look at the executive directive from Biden that was brought out in June. That's all you need to know, and that's based on what they were saying about terrorism back in the 80s. And I've told you before, just one. There were dozens of them. There are now hundreds. Just one of the definitions of a terrorist in the school that I went to was if a person does not get a W-2 for his work, in other words, he's self-employed or has his own business, has 2 weeks of supply of food, well, how subjective is that, and has a firearm. By definition, under the federal government, you are a terrorist. And so they can act on that, take anybody they want, and somebody says, well, why are you taking my neighbor away? Well, he's a known terrorist. You see how that works? That's what you've allowed to happen. That's what we have allowed to happen. And the churches have been keeping us down and pacified rather than firing us up the way they should have. The Mormon Church had and I talk a lot about the Mormons because, obviously they're quite a bit different in a lot of ways. But there was an early leader in the church, Ezra Taft Benson, who I think it was under Eisenhower, was Eisenhower's Secretary of Agriculture, as I recall. Very much involved in government. He wrote some books about freedom, about government. Was a really good man, I think. He was an apostle in the LDS Mormon Church, and eventually became president of the church, the prophet, seer, and revelator. And he talked about the importance of these things that I'm talking to you about now. We haven't seen anybody like him since he died. And there were some problems with him as well, which I could get into because of the way politics worked later. But those are the types of things that you're going to have to work on. Okay, that really is where this is going to have to go. So again, terrorism, be real careful about who, when you identify anything by the FBI as terrorism, you better take a second look at that very carefully. Also, if you're on a jury, if you get called on a jury, the way things have been the last 20 years at least, maybe 30, you have an FBI agent giving testimony, automatically go against him. Push that jury to acquit the accused, because the FBI agents lie as a matter of course. A lot of law enforcement agents do. How do I know? I was around them. I worked with them. I know. Okay? It's time that you take that responsibility to change your churches. That's the first step of this whole sequence. Change the leadership of your churches so that they support you in your liberties, not just in your religious preferences. Then go to the governments, because most likely those churches are influencing those governments, as they do in Utah, okay? And then possibly the states can then go and do something about organizing to convention of states or whatever it's going to take to fix the federal government. I don't think it's going to work, okay? I think the states are going to be broken up. The United States will be balkanized one way or another. But if you can at least get your local and state, your churches, your local and state governments on the right track, our chances will be a lot better. But you're going to have to stop going to legislatures and go to your churches and demand that they get behind you, God, liberty, and freedom, all of that. Otherwise, you're not going to make any inroads with your legislatures, not to any great degree. For instance, Governor Abbott, as we know, has now said that there will be no mandates of a certain thing in Texas, right? Well, that's real good, but there's no teeth in what he's done. There's no punishment. The closest thing that we've seen about punishments for violating that are what DeSantis has done in Florida. But that's set up this problem between the states again, the 9th and 10th Amendments, as opposed to The Fed saying that the federal government, the supremacy clause, which isn't true. The supremacy clause only applies to its constitutional power, not these things that it's done to acquire power and to assume power it doesn't have. But that's an argument, see, that is going to end up in bloodshed probably in one way or another. I don't want that, but that's probably where it's going to go eventually, one way or the other. It's all I've got for you today. I just wanted to bring this up, and I know it sounds kind of simplistic, but if you give it some thought, you'll know that I'm telling you the truth. Set your house in order, set your church in order, then set your local and state governments in order, and hopefully the Fed thing will take care of itself, either because it'll dissolve because of it's too heavy to carry its own weight, or there'll be changes made by the states to get the Feds under control. That's all we've got. Outside of that, you're just going to have to wait for God to act. And you know what? If you look at how God has acted in the past, He puts a lot of that on your shoulders. Okay, I'd stick around for some questions, but I'm sure you have other things to do today. Again, that probably sounds way, way too simplistic and all that, but I'm telling you, it's what made the difference in the Revolutionary War. That was the one thing that made the biggest difference outside of the French coming and helping us, all right? Which was probably a lot to do with the attitudes of the people that were in the churches. Look it up historically and you'll see what I'm talking about. And I could give you a lot of other historical examples, but that'll be enough for today. Sequence of liberty. Your house in order, the church in order, the local and state governments in order. And that's a big task right there, because you're going to have to get nasty with the people in power in the institutions like the Mormon Church. Maybe it won't be so much difficulty in some of the smaller churches, community churches, whatever you have. Maybe you're already on the right course there, but if you're not, you need to do something about changing the leadership or getting out of them and starting up something else. Okay? Simplistic, but that's the way it is. Y'all take care out here.